Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst, and today we're going to continue on the topic of affordability. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I think, and I wanted to expand on that and do maybe 10, 12 points on this topic because it is relevant, and as Christians, we should be ready to speak anything that we can find in the Bible to this issue, like we do all the other issues in the world that we have information on. We should be willing to speak what the Bible speaks and what the Christian faith teaches about affordability. How do you afford things when prices are rising, inflation is rising due to the Iran war? Mainly right now, I think gas was half of what it is today per gallon. So it might be a short-term glitch in our economy, or it could be a long-term problem for fuel prices and so forth. But we don't know. But here are some principles of affordability that I think every Christian should consider, and it would help to review these. I just want to go over some of them, and I already talked about most of these, but I want to talk about some of the others here. The first principle is in affordability is for the Christian to pray over your finances. That's right, pray over your finances. It says in the Bible to pray without ceasing, pray over everything. It talks about worry about nothing, pray over everything. So we have all kinds of passages that talk about prayer. We should apply prayer to every area of our life, including our finances. A lot of Christians neglect praying over finances. That's hard to believe, but they have thought of maybe finances of something of a secular, worldly, earthly, material subject, and so it's not a spiritual, religious, church subject. So they think, well, I don't have to pray about that. But you really do have to pray about that because the Bible says to commit your ways to the Lord. And one of the important ways in our life is finances, material goods. We have to deal with a material world, and we have to make a living. We have to put food on the table. We have to clothe ourselves, provide transportation, provide for families. We have to do all kinds of things in the material world, and so we need to pray about all of these. So it goes without saying that if you're a Christian, you need to be starting to pray about your finances, and whether you're in a crisis financially, or whether things are going smooth for you financially, or whether if you're in an abundant, prosperous time of your life and money is coming in and expenses are not overwhelming you and everything like that, you still need to pray over your finances because, again, there is a responsibility of stewardship on your part before God. You have to be held accountable for how you use your finances. Let's say you're a wealthy or prosperous Christian. Well, you have to pray over your finances so that you don't squander and waste them on yourself, but that you are using them in a responsible way so that when you give an account before the Lord someday, you won't have to be shameful or remorseful or sad because you squandered what resources He provided. So there is a big responsibility for wealthier Christians to actually use their finances in a God-glorifying way. So yes, we have to pray for finances. If you're wealthy, if you're a middle income person, and you're not particularly in a crisis right now, but you're making your payments every month on maybe your mortgage on your home or a car payment or guaranteed student loan payments, or you're buying groceries and you're just making ends meet. You're not wealthy, but you're not poor. you need to pray and you need to make sure that you're spending your money and not wasting it, because again, you will be held accountable for the way you spend and use money. And then if you're struggling, if you're at the lower end of the economic totem pole, you really have to pray about your finances, because there's no room for error there. You have to make sure that you are not squandering and wasting and foolishly spending, and you have to prioritize very carefully. And so everyone has to pray over their finances, and that's one of the first steps. And a next step would be to have a plan. And again, this applies to all levels of finances. If you're poor, middle income, or wealthy, you still should have a plan. Wealthy people have to have a plan, or else they'll lose their money, they'll waste their money. They can go bankrupt just like anybody else, because they can overspend, or they can think that they have all this money so they don't have to pay attention. And then before you know it, it's gone. So, yeah, you can lose. We've seen pro athletes, basketball players, football players, millionaires lose every dime because of poor money management. So you have to have a plan. Middle income people have to have a plan, and especially the lower income people, you have to have a plan to survive, because again, the razor thin margins on the mistakes you can make. If you're a wealthy person and you make some mistakes financially due to mismanagement and you don't have a plan or budget, you can survive. You might get knocked down to lower middle class, and have to cut back and sell your home and sell your car and do all kinds of things because of mismanagement. And if you're a middle income person and you make a few mistakes, you might still be able to recover and pick up your life. But if you're on the bottom end of the lower economic income and you make a large number of mistakes and you don't have a plan, you're not organized, and you mismanage your funds, you could be out on the street. You could be penniless. You could be destitute. And believe, I've seen people with heaped up possessions. I'll never forget it. I lived in Colorado Springs for about 5 to 7 years, and pastoring a church out there. And I was walking down the sidewalk one day, and I saw in front of an apartment building a woman sitting in a heap of possessions. She had her bed, she had her something like a clothes piled all around, dressers, chairs, a kitchen table. She had all of her possessions that she had in her apartment, and evidently she didn't pay her bill, and they just kicked her out and threw out all of her possessions on the front yard of the apartment complex, and she was sitting on top of all of these possessions, just guarding them so nobody would take them away. And it was a pathetic sight. I went over and asked her what was the problem, and she said, I have some people coming to pick all this stuff up in a truck and so on and so forth. But you don't want to be that way. You don't want to be out on the street. You don't want to, sometimes they even just kick you out, and they don't organize your possessions. They just put them in a big truck and dump them or sell them off. So some people are evicted and then they can't go back in. So it's really bad. So you have to have a plan. You have to make a budget. Everybody can do a budget. It's just common sense. If you have to have a certain amount of income to pay your bills, you have to be able to control your outgo. You have to be able to control your spending to the point where you are not going over your budget every month. Because if you go over enough, and then you'll start borrowing, and it just goes down from there. And then you can't make those payments, and it becomes more and more pressure packed. And so you talk about Proverbs and you look at all of the things that Proverbs says, and it'll teach you to have a plan, have a budget, even if it's not a strict, detailed plan, like say you have to come up with $2,000 a month to live in your situation. Uh, you can have that budget somewhat flexible. You can say, well, if it's within $1,900 to $2,100 a month, or $1,500 to $2,500 a month, we have to spend no more than that. Because some months there will be additional expenses where you have to spend more than the plan calls for. And then there are some months that you may not have to spend as much, so you can make up for that deficit for the other months. So you got to have a plan. And I would encourage Christians who are struggling with affordability right now to have a plan. You got to at least have a goal, a monthly goal of what you're going to live within based on your income. So you figure out what you need to live, and then sometimes it means, okay, I got to get a different job, because if you're trying to make a living and support a family at McDonald's and you're working there, you're probably going to have to find another job, because you're not going to normally, generally speaking, be able to support a family while working at McDonald's. They just don't pay enough. But unless you're a manager or shift worker or whatever, a shift supervisor. But if you find another job that pays enough that you can have a reasonable salary, and then you can begin to figure out how to make that work. And you stick with that budget and pray over everything, of course. Pray over the budget. Pray that there aren't any major expenses. Pray that there are no emergency expenses. Pray that you can be disciplined enough. Pray that God gives you the discipline to stick to the budget. So all of these things are important. Another point I mentioned briefly in this last point, but a lot of people are tempted to go into credit card debt and borrow when they're in a crisis of affordability. And we're seeing more and more and more debt rising today because of the affordability crisis or crunch that we're going through in our society today. And this is a problem because the more debt you get yourself into, you're digging a hole that you're going to have to dig yourself out of. And so what happens is debt makes your finances even tighter when you begin to have to pay that debt back. So yeah, you can run up tabs on your credit card and you can continue living at a higher level than you can actually afford through credit by just charging it on the credit card. But there will come a time when you're going to have to pay that debt off. And so with high interest rates on credit cards, they're upwards to 20+% a year. So you're going to pay a lot of money just to pay off that debt. And say even if you run up a $5,000 debt to buy food and all kinds of regular living expenses, if you compound that with interest, you're going to have to be paying a lot more than you normally would have. So the key principle from the Bible, it talks about owe no man anything but the debt of love. That's the goal, that you don't want to owe any man anything. Now, there are exceptions. If you talk to some of the leading Christian financial experts, like a Dave Ramsey, for example, or almost everyone that I've heard. Ron Blue was popular back a few decades. Larry Burkett was popular. I've read his books. I've read Ron Blue books, Ron Blue. And I've read Malcolm Muggeridge, I think his name was, way back, decades and decades ago, and others. And they've all said to stay out of debt as much as possible. But they also said that if you are in debt, there are a couple debts that are not necessarily bad, not necessarily dangerous, and those are the if you buy a home and you don't spend too much, and it's at a reasonable interest rate for what, 20 years or so. Now, I had a blessing because I was able to buy my home on a loan that was only a 5-year loan. So, and I got a great deal on the home, and it was a fixer-upper, and I had to do a lot of work and put roofing on it and repairs and all kinds of stuff that brought the price way down, and I was able to finance it on a 5-year loan. Now, I still struggled to make payments, and there was a lot of anxiety and there was a lot of pressure because there were some months where even the lower payment that I had to make, I only had to make like about a $400 a month house payment. But if you're struggling, like I was, low paying, uh, low salary, church position, not making very much money. I've never really been in the ministry for money. I've never made very much money in church ministry. I was never one of these big mega pastors making millions of dollars, or even, you might even say, a normal middle class or upper middle class income. It's always been more toward the lower end of the financial spectrum. And so I had to be very careful with how I spent my money. And I was fortunate enough, the Lord blessed me. I prayed a lot about it. I was able to buy a home, uh, $400 house payments, only 5 years. And so it worked out really good. And now I own a home. It's all paid for. I just have to maintain it, which is a challenge. But you have to be careful with debt because you can get yourself into trouble real quick, especially with credit card debt. That's what I would tell people, that do not give in to the temptation to use credit cards and other forms of debt as a means to pay your normal bills. Now, if there is a emergency, like your car breaks down and you need that car for work and you need to get repairs, it is nice to have an access to credit, but then you get that payment all paid off. You get that credit card. You can use credit cards. I use credit cards all the time. I always pay the bill off at the end of the month. So I'm using it more as a convenience. I'm using it more as a safety security issue, because if someone steals your credit card, steals your wallet, you can cancel your cards. If you're having to go with cash all the time, somebody steals your wallet, they've got your cash. You'll never get it back. So the same way with checks. Checks are kind of risky because somebody can forge your name and run up a big bill and draw directly out of your bank. That's a problem. So credit cards offer a little bit of security, and you can actually get money back from the credit card company if somebody tries to charge you for something you didn't pay for, and so on and so forth. So avoid debt if at all possible, and live below your means. So much of affordability crisis is because people don't want to live within their means. If they only make $30,000 a year, then they have to live on that $30,000 a year, and it's hard because there's so many advertisements, so many people trying to get us to buy this, that, or the other. I'm amazed at all the advertising for brand new cars, but who in the world can buy a $50,000 brand new car and make $7, $8, $9, $1,000 a month car payments? Who can do that? That's an affordability problem. If you are thinking you're going to buy a brand new car and thinking that you can finance it and thinking you're going to be able to make those kind of payments, most people cannot sustain $1,000 a year a month car payment on top of a mortgage payment and on top of credit card debt and all kinds of other debt. No, that's insane. So um, living within your means, once you have the plan or the budget that you worked out, and I know I get it. Some people just don't like to sit down with paper and pen and just figure out with a calculator how they can afford this on that amount coming in. But it's basically a necessity. You have to figure out, okay, I'm making this much right now at my job. So based on what I make, this is how much we can afford per month. So how can we afford housing, and how can we afford transportation and healthcare and food and all the other living expenses? How can we squeeze that into the amount I'm making per month? How can we make it work? And it may be hard, if you're, for example, if you're a salesman and you drive a lot and you have to fill up with gas a lot, and then the price of gas doubled from last year to this year because of the Iran war. That's a problem. That's a challenge. So you're going to have to revisit that budget from last year, and you're going to say, how can I squeeze more of the gas money from some other category? And, if you have a cable subscription that costs $200 a month or something like that, you may have to cut that cable bill totally out and use just, say, an internet video entertainment structure system like YouTube or some other subscription, and get rid of that cable bill of $200 for just video cable entertainment. That is what happens. You have to, they call it robbing Peter to pay Paul. You have to take from one category and make it work in another category. So if in that example, if you're a salesman, you need to drive your car and you're going to need to spend that money for gas, and the price of gas has doubled, you're going to have to pull that from some other category, and you're going to have to make the adjustment. And that's hard. But with the help of God and the wisdom of God and prayer, you pray over everything, and staying out of debt, resisting the temptation to put that credit card down and just rack up a big credit card bill. With self-discipline like that, you can make it through and you can make it work. Without a plan, without a budget, if you're not going to pray over it, if you're just going to wing it, as they say, you're probably going to get yourself in a financial death spiral and just get worse and worse and worse. And you don't want to go bankrupt. You never want to go bankrupt. You want to do everything you can to avoid going bankrupt. I know people that have gone bankrupt. Thank God I've never had to go bankrupt. But a lot of people today are going bankrupt, and it's because they got themselves into credit card debt. And then the credit card bills came due with the higher interest rates kicking in, and they were sunk because they couldn't make even the basic monthly minimum payment on their credit card. So avoid the temptations of credit and borrowing. Our U.S. government, what is it, 35 trillion now in debt and climbing? Everybody knows there's going to come a day. We're already paying like $1 trillion in interest a year on our debt load. The federal government's paying $1 trillion a year just to interest service the debt. That is unsustainable. At some point, something is going to happen. And so that's the way it is in the family too. If you put money on credit and then you keep piling it up, there's going to come a day of reckoning, and you don't want that, because that will push you further toward bankruptcy, and you don't want that, because then not only is it wrong to not pay your bills and just walk away from bills that you consented to, but it hurts your credit for a decade or so. more than a decade, even in some cases. So you want to avoid bankruptcy, and you want to do that by avoiding getting yourself into big debt, other than, say, your mortgage, which is going to be there. But even that, you have to be careful in taking on big debt. Don't overpay for your house. Don't overpay for that car. You don't have to have a new car. If you're going through an affordability crisis in your life, you don't need a new car. You can get a used car. You can get a pre-owned car, they call them today now. You can get a quality pre-owned car. You can get something more practical than a new car. And it just takes a matter of seeking God's wisdom and seeking Him in prayer, praying over your plan or your budget, whatever you want to call it, and praying for that God would spare you from big emergencies. Pray that He would help you maintain employment. Pray that you'd even get an increase in pay, or that new opportunities would come and you'd even get a bigger paying job. Although money is not the primary object for employment, seeking the most money you can get is not the best policy. I've known people that will just go anywhere and do pretty much any kind of work for a bigger paycheck. And that is not right, because you want to be able to go to work and have interest in it and feel excited about it and be challenged by it, but not lost and overwhelmed and just anxious about it. And you don't want to work for some place that you dread going in every morning to work. You want to enjoy the place you work with, enjoy the people, get along with them. You don't want to involve yourself in any illegal activities or even borderline illegal. You want to make sure that your job is on the up and up and you are happy with your situation, and then you'll do better in that situation. You'll enjoy your life better in that situation, and you'll not be as anxious or fearful of losing things and losing money and losing your job. So I wouldn't be someone who chases the highest paycheck as far as the work that you do. I would be someone who looked for a job that I could settle in and do a good job and was interested in, had good people around me, and be able to make a living that way. But you have to have a budget, you have to have a plan, you have to be able to pray to the Lord to bless. We'll talk more about some of the other features of affordability. One of them is to keep up your giving to the work of the Lord, to the kingdom of the Lord. I know someone asked in a comment a couple of weeks ago, why give 10% to the church? Why give a tithe? It's called biblical 10% of your income to the church. Well, the reason is because the Bible tells us to be a generous giver, to give for the work of the Lord on the earth, to give to spread the gospel, to give to spread the kingdom of God. We want the whole earth to be full of the glory of God. We want all of His truth all over the world, to reach every nation, to reach every person, to offer them the gospel of salvation. We want the biblical principles to permeate all of culture and our society and governments and all of the arts and sciences and everything. We want God's truth and His word to influence everything. So to do that, we have to give to support the churches and the causes that are doing that. And so you don't want to ever stop giving to the Lord. You want His blessings upon your work. Well, that's it for today. We'll pick up on this topic again next time. God bless.